authorsvoice.net. This is Lit with Love, where we interview romance authors, and it's a virtual signing. So you can order books as we speak and send in questions. Thank you for being here. I am Sonali Dev, and this is Julia Quinn. Thanks for being here, Julia.
Thank you for having me.
It's extremely special that you're here because Julia was one of the authors that got me personally into reading romance. Definitely.
Such an honor.
And absolutely true, and definitely one of the reasons I started to write romance, because your romance was so finely written and just exquisite in language and witty and all of the things that I loved in my books. And so I was like, oh, this is the kind of romance I want to read and write. So welcome. And okay, so as I said before, feel free to send in questions. And for everyone who has sent in questions, thank you so much. We are, at the end of the show, going to do a drawing and a giveaway of Julia's latest book, which we're going to be talking about today.
Oh, I'm like, where's the camera? There we go.
And it's The Girl with the Make-Believe Husband, which is lovely, and we're going to be speaking about it. And we will give away a signed copy, but of course you can get your very own signed copy by just clicking the Buy Book button below the screen. All right, so Julia.
Yes.
Did you want to talk a little bit about this book and where it came from?
Sure. So this book came about in the way I think a lot of books come about for authors, which is that we write ourselves into a corner and then have to desperately try to write our way out of the corner. And what happened was, in the book that came before this, because of Miss Bridgerton, it ended with the brother of the hero being missing in the colonies. Mm-hmm. He was a captain in the Royal Army, and he was off fighting because it's set in 1779. And so it ended. And then I thought, oh my gosh, I got to figure out what happened to him, because he's over there. Because the fact that he'd gone missing was kind of a big part of the previous book, because the hero and the heroine come together to try to find him from London, working behind the scenes type of thing. And it occurred to me that I could work with this one of two ways. I could either start the book maybe 3 years later and say something like, oh, and then this happened and now we're back. Or I could be brave and have him, in New York, which is where the book was set, which was kind of fascinating for me because I had never set a book outside of the British Isles before. I had originally planned to start it in New York and have it end in England, but that didn't happen. There seemed to be too much story going on and they didn't quite make it over. And so it's also my amnesia book. I decided this was my 25th book, and I decided after 24 novels I kind of deserved the amnesia trope. Because it's kind of stereotypical, like the romance, like the amnesia trope. And so I did that. So it was fun. It was really fun. And it was a challenge. I had to do a lot of different types of research than I've done before. And I'm originally from the New York area, so I had to make sure I was writing from not using my own contemporary knowledge of the area. So I kept having to check, being like, oh, wait a minute, that street wasn't there then, or was that town in existence? Because, I know the area quite well. So it was very interesting. And then finally, to be writing a book set in colonial New York, but with main characters who are British. Because those were the people who were in New York.
During the Revolutionary War.
Exactly. Yes. So, and that's who was in New York at the time, because it was an occupied city. So I needed my main characters to be the good guys, but being an American, I didn't want to make the other guys the bad guys. So I had to think about, okay, how is the story going to be structured so that the actual war is more of a backdrop than an active part of the book, because I didn't want to make the Americans the bad guys.
Yeah, and I think you do the two thoughts I had. Actually, I had a lot of thoughts when I was reading it, but the two thoughts that I had, one was, oh my gosh, she's doing an amnesia book. So it was, and they're always fun. And I think they're always fun to play with, especially in our genre. So
I think maybe every author deserves one amnesia book. I probably won't ever do it again, I think.
Yeah, but I'm glad you did this one.
Yes.
It was fun. But I did also see, it is a wartime book in some ways, because your books are really light, and the tone is always not non-broody, so to speak, although you have written some broody heroes, but still it's always this bright light, and to write a war book, there is some of that heaviness of war that you touch a little bit on.
Yeah.
So so that was interesting in this. But I love that when you were explaining the book, you said you started with his brother was lost, and one of the things that I personally connect most with your books is that entire family aspect of it. You know, the siblings, I mean, the Bridgertons, we all kind of just madly love them, right? So it's almost like you never want to leave their world, and those characters feel so real for that reason. I think that there's so much context to them. It's not just them, but all these people who have feelings about them, and them having all these feelings about these people. So that kind of, I think, completes them so much. And I've always wondered, in terms of influence, it feels like family is such an influence in your writing. So where does that kind of come from, and what are the major influences?
Well, I have a pretty big family. I have 2 sisters and then a half brother and half sister. But I don't know, I've always been interested in dynamics, and you can talk to and interact with your siblings in ways that you can't get away with pretty much anyone else. And I love bickering, and that's how families do it. And so, yeah, I have discovered over the years, I really enjoy writing group scenes. And they're not always easy to do, because you have to make sure the characters are distinct enough that people can tell who the heck is talking, or what, how is this woman different from that woman if they're both just like cousins. And so I like having those group dynamics, and it's just something I've kind of grown up with doing and really enjoying. And I like following the characters a little bit. And it's interesting because I don't think about the characters when I'm not writing the books, which disappoints a lot of readers.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I turn it off.
So you don't dream about them. They're not in conversations with you.
Absolutely not.
Wow.
There are so many.
To teach me.
There are so many things I would rather do than write most of the time that I'm just like, I'm done. Like, let's watch some TV, get my coffee. I'll read someone else's book. I'm not one of those writers who lives their books and their characters, and I'm not one of those writers who will say, I couldn't do anything but write. Like, I can do so many things other than write. That's probably why I don't write very quickly. And I don't say this to impugn the creative process. I want to make it utterly clear I really enjoy writing. I can't imagine any other type of job, but it's just, I'm not one of these people who's consumed by it. And, it's been funny because readers will say to me, well, what happened to this character afterwards? And did Hyacinth find the diamonds? And did Francesca have children? And I would be like, I don't know. And then the reader's like, what do you mean you don't know? I said, well, it's like, there's no Act 6 in Shakespeare. I don't know. And so even though I love bringing characters back, if I don't bring them back as secondary characters, I don't really think about what happened to them. And so that's how a number of years ago I ended up writing the Bridgerton second epilogues.
I was just going to say. Yeah.
Which were a collection, so the Bridgertons were an 8-book series. And I'd gotten so many questions from readers about what had happened to them that I gave each book its own second epilogue, which is about 30, 35 pages long. And it was wonderful for me as a writer because I got to do things that were a little creatively different. I wrote one in the first person, which I've never done before. In the first one I wrote, which was for It's in His Kiss, that was the first one I actually wrote. I had a love scene between a couple who'd been married for 20 years. And it hadn't even really occurred to me until I was writing that, but that is very different from a love scene that's a part of a courtship. And then I got to revisit the famous Pall Mall scene from The Viscount Who Loved Me by having them do a rematch. So I got to do a lot of really fun things with that, and visit these characters again and make them that much more three-dimensional and real. And so that's something I do when I can. The one thing I don't want to do is write, I'll hear from people saying, oh, how about the Bridgerton Christmas story? And they can all be there. And I don't want to write a book where I'm just trotting out a bunch of characters for the sake of trotting them all out. They have to have a reason to be there, which is why you don't always see all the old characters when people say, well, how come she didn't show up in that book? And I'd say, because it wasn't her book and there wasn't any reason for her to be there.
Although I would love a big Bridgerton reunion book.
Well, if I can think of how to do it so they're not just being trotted out, then I would do it. But I haven't been able to figure out how to do that.
Well,
so.
Someday. So there's hope. But yeah, and I've always said this to you that my favorite book of yours is, I mean, I love them all, but When He Was Wicked was just magical to me. So I was really glad with that, that second epilogue came out, because we knew whether Franny was going to be a mom or not. And it was so satisfying to know that.
There was something about that second epilogue, and people often say, well, what's your favorite book? And I don't really have it, but there's something about that second epilogue, which is one of my favorite pieces of writing I've ever done. And I'm not even sure why, but something about that just hit me. So
I think it is because it comes from, and I keep going back actually and reading that book. And those characters, I mean, I'm amazed they don't live inside you, because I think Franny and Michael kind of, I've internalized them because I think I was reading them at a time when it's just special for many reasons. And one of the things that I think those characters are that real is because they do satisfy the tropes of the traditional romance hero and heroine, but there's something more fundamentally broken and real about them. And I think that's what it is. I mean, the idea of her not being able to get pregnant, and of widowhood, and the fact that they both love this man who is gone.
That was actually something I had to fight for in the book, because in romance novels, usually if the heroine is a widow, the first husband was either evil or it was a marriage of convenience, and she liked him but she didn't love him. And I thought, well, what if she really loved her first husband? And and what if, boy, he loved him too, because this cousin and best friend. And so that was really challenging. And so I remember saying, I need the first 4 chapters of the book to take place when the first husband is still alive. I mean, because the big conflict of the book are the guilt that these two people feel for falling in love later on. And I was like, you're not going to understand the depth of why they feel guilty and conflicted unless you see them with him. I can't just say they loved him. You have to see it. And so that was, it was a very different book for me, and it was a book that was structured very differently from most romance novels. And I was very proud of that, because it was, I don't want to write the same book over and over again, and that seemed to be something that.
Yeah, it is magic. It's definitely, that
Thank
book
you.
is magic. So I love it. So we're going to turn to some reader questions.
Sure.
I have, some viewer questions, and this one is from Nikki in Austin.
Hi.
Nikki. And she wants to know, do you write more than one series at a time, or do you finish one before starting another?
Not only do I not write more than one series at a time, I don't write more than one book at a time. And I am madly jealous of the authors who they're just like, I am overflowing with ideas and I know what I'm going to do the next 6 books. I am just trying to get one book written. And I'll let you guys all in on a secret. Nobody ever reads from the last page of a book, but I will. This is no spoiler, by the way. It ends happily. Oh no. They get together. But at the very end of the book, they're in England and they meet up with his family, and Edward's like, where's Andrew? And the brother's like, the sister-in-law says, shall you tell him or shall I? Billy said. George took a breath. Well, now that is quite a story, ... about what happened to Andrew. Was like, do you think I have any idea what happened to Andrew when I wrote that? I am not that clever, and I just don't have all the ideas sitting around. And so I finish and be like, oh my gosh, now I need to figure out what happened to him. And so basically that's why I work on one book at a time, because it's all I can do to get that one idea and get it out and do it to the best of my abilities. So so I guess maybe for me personally, it's a way to make the book better because I'm really focused on it. But yeah, I can just do one thing at a time. I can't multitask writing. I can multitask a few other things, but not writing.
Yeah. I'm that way too, so I completely understand. I have the background, but not in the foreground. It's always one. And I was just going to ask you how much time it takes you to write a book, but we have a question from someone who did not tell us who he or she is. So please, when you send us your questions, do let us know, so if you win something, we know whom to send it to. So she wanted to know how long it took you to write this book, but also tell us how long generally.
Generally speaking, I would say it takes 6 to 9 months to write a book, and that includes what I call the pre-writing phase, which is when I'm really trying to figure out what the heck I'm doing. And I write you could call it a synopsis, you could call it a proposal, but it's when I sort of, it's not really an outline because that seems far more organized than anything that I do, but it's more than just figuring out the plot. I spend a lot of time figuring out the characters, who they are, what happened to them before the book started. And a lot of the things that I figure out and have in this proposal never even end up in the book, but I like to think that since I know it, somehow it helps me to make a more three-dimensional character. So I end up spending a fair amount of time on that and then actually write the book. And it's about 6 to 9 months, and this probably fell into that somewhere. I don't remember offhand exactly what, but
and you have them come out about once a year?
About once a year. There was one break for, what book was that? For The Sum of All Kisses. It turned out to be, for some reason that book was just very difficult for me to get going. I rewrote chapter 2 like 3 times, which I never do, because I'm just too horrified at the thought of throwing away writing. And I just like, no! And I just realized I was just burned out. It wasn't writer's block, I was just burned out. I was like, you know what, I need a break.
And that was book number, do you remember?
Well, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's probably about 21 or so.
So,
yeah, and I remember being so frustrated and talking to my husband, and he said, you're allowed to hate your job from time to time. And when you're a novelist, you're like, no, but I'm living the dream. Everybody wants to be a novelist. It's wonderful. He's like, you're allowed to hate your job from time to time, and you're allowed to get sick of it. And I contacted my publisher, and I just said, I need to take a little time off. I need to rediscover the joy. And so I ended up on a 15-month schedule for a little bit until we could get me back into June. And now I'm back, and so I should be about every year from now on.
Yeah, and that helped, the time, just taking some time.
It did. I just needed to rest my brain for a little bit from that.
Yeah, and real life. So we were at the ALA just an hour back, and I kind of overheard the story about your earrings. So before I forget, I want you to tell the viewers about these gorgeous earrings.
These are earrings, and they have the we need to get all close up, like, whoa.
So they're basically the book.
They are the book, and the cover is rewritten. And my daughter got them for me for Christmas, and she wrote the back is rewritten. It's modeled on the back cover copy, and it is rewritten, but it's to me, so it's very sweet.
It is, and it's really, really sweet. And you can't see it, but it's actually, it has a spine, and it has the
yeah.
So.
I feel like I should be giving a plug to somebody on Etsy, but she got it off Etsy, and she just emailed them that is not the earring. What do you need me to do? There we go. Da, da, da. There's that cover. I was like, that was really scary. I looked at the screen and saw like my mouth and was like, ah! Don't do that again. Anyway, it was very sweet because she emailed my editor and got the cover file, the art, because the book wasn't out yet, so it was very sweet.
That's fabulous. All right, I do want to talk a little bit about themes, and we keep getting questions. So let me ask you this, because there's also in this book, and I find almost as a theme across your books, is this, the heroes are virtuous, so they're gentlemen and they're good guys. So you write the good guys.
I keep trying to write a bad guy, a bad boy hero, and then they just always end up being really nice.
I love that. I love, well, what they call betas, but are not really. I like the gentleman heroes, so.
Yeah. It's just, I think it maybe fundamentally boils down to the fact that I don't want to spend my life with a jerk. And and I've seen, I like reading bad boy heroes too, but sometimes you read them and you're just like, I don't know, like, could she really have changed him that fundamentally in a week? And I always had crushes on the good guys and the geeks and the nerds, and I married one, so. There you go.
Yeah, I hear you. I feel exactly the same way. I do have a theory where I think the bad boys in romance are actually good guys in bad guy clothing, but you're right to get it, do that turnaround. But I personally love that you write the good guys, and yeah, so yay for the good guys. But Robin, hi Robin. Robin Cuss wants to know from Naperville. Robin is actually a really good friend. So
okay.
Robin. Robin wants to know what drew you to the Revolutionary period.
Well, basically what I said at the beginning, I had no choice. I sort of wrote myself into the corner with the previous book. As to why I moved back a generation, the previous book out of the Regency, that was, the original idea was so I could do something where I could have Edmund and Violet Bridgerton as secondary characters. Because I always said I'm not going to write their story because, and this is also not a spoiler, he dies very young of it turns out he's allergic to bees, and he's stung by a bee and dies. And they don't really understand what happened, but it does happen. And that's in the background in the Bridgerton series. Everybody knows this is how the father died. And I've had many, many readers ask me and say, would you write their love story? And I say, no, because we all know he's going to die so young. And can you imagine if that's the first book of mine that you ever read? And then you're like, oh, and of course you would love it, right? So then you're like, I'm going to read everything else she ever wrote. And you go and you get the Bridgerton series and discover I killed this guy off at the age of 38 or 39. I can't do that. But I thought, okay, well, maybe we can have them as secondary characters and I could talk about his siblings. And that came about. And so that whole idea actually started before I wrote Violet in Bloom, which was a novella that was collected with the Bridgerton second epilogues, which we talked about, which isn't really their love story, but it's kind of her life story, and you see them fall in love in that one. So now I'm not really sure how I'm going to fit them in, but that was the idea, to go back in time. And then I ended up in the Revolutionary era by accident.
Yes.
The author with the accidental plot. Okay.
Okay, so I think this is Heather who had asked us the previous question because she said, sorry about the name. So do you, and I think you've kind of talked about this a little bit, about the planning phase. What is your planning phase like for the writing? But,
yeah, I mean, it's really, I spend a lot of time just sort of thinking, and then it always surprises me when I actually sit down at the computer and actually try to get some words onto the screen, how much more seems to come out. And then I think to myself, you really shouldn't have spent so much time just thinking, because like the minute you actually sit down and do this, you get more. But really, the big change in my writing came when I did The Duke and I, which was the first Bridgerton book. And it wasn't because it was the first Bridgerton book. It was because, for whatever reason, I approached writing the book a little differently. And when I wrote that proposal, I delved into who the characters were a lot more than I'd ever done. Before that, to me, a proposal was a lot of just this happens, that happened, this plot. And that was when I started spending a lot more time on character before I even start the book. And so that's really where a lot of the time goes. And yeah, that's what I'm struggling with the next book, I have to admit. I'm not nearly as far into it as I should be.
Right. Well, you'll get there. But with The Duke and I think it was one of the first romances that I had read that had a hero that was struggling with a disability, almost. And there was, and you had, how as romance writers you're told over and over again, no backstory, no backstory, no backstory, and yet I find that the authors
Nobody
who go
tells me
into
that.
right, who go into backstory are the best stories. And one of the examples that I give when I'm saying that to people is The Duke and I, because you have this
prologue.
long prologue of him and what this means to him, and after that every interaction that he has with anyone in that book is kind of fueled by that prologue. So.
Well, it was sort of like what we were talking about with When He Was Wicked. It's like, how could that possibly, how could I show you really what, so his disability is that he stutters, but how could I show you how that really affected him if you haven't seen, I could just say, oh yeah, his father didn't like it and treated him badly, or you could actually see it.
Yes.
And I thought you needed that to really understand why he's behaving as he does. And not every book needs that. I mean, some books, I will have a lengthy prologue where you'll see some sort of defining either moment or theme or something that makes the character who they are. And then other books, you just jump right in. It kind of, I don't know, it just depends.
Absolutely. But at some point, flashbacks, it's just, structurally different, but you do get the sense. You can tell when an author knows all that backstory, whether or not it's on the page. It shows, and yeah, definitely with that book it did. So, all right, we have one last question. So if we have 5 minutes, so if you want to quickly send in more questions. Otherwise, this is the last reader question I have. And Maria in Brooklyn, hi Maria.
Hi Maria.
Wants to know, why do you think history stories make such good sources for romance?
So I have a little theory about historical romance, or I should say more specifically Regency romance, which I write books set in the Regency era primarily. These are two, my most recent are a little bit earlier, but I think that these historical romances, they are close enough to the modern era that people behaved in ways that are fundamentally familiar to us. And Sonali and I had discussed before we were on the air a little bit about how we are writing in the 21st century, and so your heroines are kind of a little proto-feminist and whatever. But it's not like, say, the medieval period when mysticism and religion just permeated everything in life. And certainly in the Regency period, organized religion was still a very big part of your culture. You go to church every Sunday, but it wasn't like the medieval. And so I'm able to make my characters behave in ways that are fundamentally familiar to modern audiences. But it's far enough back that it lends a certain fairy tale quality to it. And it's also far enough back in historical facts and whatever that your characters are dealing with different restrictions. And so, like, there are certain plots I could never do in a contemporary. I mean, in a contemporary, I'm going to force somebody to get married because they're in the same room together. That's just not going to work. So I think it's that nice, it's been a really long day. But if you think like the Venn diagram of fairy tale romanticness and modernism or whatever, at least the time period I've chosen to write in kind of gets it right there, and so I'm able to do that.
Right, so we can suspend our disbelief about some of it and not about some of it. And I think as readers, we enjoy doing that dance when we're reading romance. So you're right, it does work really well. Last question, I guess I don't want this to be the last question, but one of the things, again, that I love about your writing is the sexual tension. Okay. There's always this, it kind of, this build-up. And even in this book, I don't think they don't actually do the deed until we're 60% of the way in.
Probably.
Right. And so there's that lovely wanting to, not wanting to, and the same thing with When He Was Wicked, which is incredibly hot people. So if you have not read that book, those are some of the best sex scenes.
That I've definitely the hottest book I've read.
Yeah, and those are, and again, emotionally hot sex scenes. But I keep going back to that book. But we are talking about this book. I'm making this all about me. But what are your so for me, sexual tension is really important, and therefore, I kind of seek it out in the books, and I love it. So what are the things that you love about the romance you read? What are the things that you seek out for writing and reading romance?
Well, I love that tension also. And it was fascinating, and I hope I have time to tell this whole thing, but basically I found that sometimes like I'd be reading romances and I'd find myself skimming through the sex scenes. I was like, well, that's okay. And then also there were other times I've read romances where they close the bedroom door and that's it. And I feel like, like I've been deprived of something. So then I started thinking, like, how could I be feeling these two simultaneous things? And I realized that I need, if there's going to be a sex scene, it needs to be something that's going to move the characters or the plot or the story. It can't just be for the sake of having a sex scene. And I think that, that's the fundamental difference between romance and erotica. Is, why do you have the intimate scene in there? Is it because of the romance, or is it because of, the titillation of this erotic moment? And and that's a major oversimplification. But so for me, I don't know. I like that buildup, but then you have to follow through. I think because as a reader, I get disappointed if you don't. But again, and you'll also notice in my scenes when the characters are intimate, they're always talking through it. And I just think that makes it so much more interesting to hear what they're actually saying to each other, and then you also maybe know what one of them is thinking at the same time, and it's not always the same thing. And I don't know, I like that moment. I like that buildup of just getting kind of excited. Everybody likes to fall in love.
Oh yeah.
It's probably more fun than staying in love, although I think staying in love is ultimately more rewarding and special. But there's that rush, and I think that's why.
Right, and that's definitely one of the reasons we read. And with erotica, you're right. But I think the best erotica is erotica that does not separate the physical from the emotional. And a lot of beautiful eroticas out there.
Oh yeah, and I didn't want to say that it's not separating, but it's again, where is that emotional coming from? Is it part of a courtship? I guess I should have introduce the word courtship. I don't know. I'm not always great at explaining these things.
Right. I have this awful thing that I say, and I don't know if I can say it on screen. Is that the best sex scene is when the characters are bleeping with their hearts.
Okay.
So, I'm not allowed to say that. So all right.
I think you're allowed to say bleep.
Well, yeah. But I really like to say
the
the real thing.
Make-believe husband. As I said, it's been a long day.
It has. But definitely, yours definitely do bleep with their hearts, and that's a good thing. So what are you reading right now?
I want to like put that like on some sort of meme type thing. Julie Quinn, her characters bleep with their hearts.
Yeah, and speaking of memes, Julie's Facebook page has the best memes.
Oh.
We all furiously share them, so they're great.
Well, that's why I only write one book a year, because I spend too much time finding all my. They're all grammar jokes. I love grammar jokes and stuff like that, because I mean that's who I am. Grammar jokes and really bad signs. Where the people are like, employees must wash hands, and quotes. I'm like, I don't think you understand how quotation marks work. So.
You just do it without actually touching your hands when you or something. So what are you reading right now and loving?
So I've been reading a lot of contemporary romance recently, and I've been reading this one author, Lauren Lane, a lot, and I really. Oh, you're nodding. Have you read her?
Yes, and I just had, so Robin, who sent the question in, it has promised to stalk Lauren at RWA, because she, I have not read her yet, but I have a friend who has almost a gun to my head saying she's so good that I have to read her now. So
yes, and I sort of stumbled on it, and I really like, I think it's the character development, and it's not all about the sex. But, when it finally happens, you're like, ooh, yay, and I think because, there's this tension building up to it that you really get into it. So that I really like. What else have I been reading lately? I can tell you what I am reading. I just started The Pearl Thief by Elizabeth, I don't know how to pronounce her last name, Wein, W-E-I-N. It's the same author who wrote Codename Verity, which was one of my very favorite books ever. Oh, my goodness. That will just gut you, just to warn you. And that's not a romance. And then, I just read Sarah MacLean's new one, which is The Day of the Duchess. I'm having massive title envy over that, and I think that comes out very soon. I got an early copy of that, so that was fun. And she's always marvelous.
She's lovely. And best romance ever. Now I'm putting you in the seat.
I think it might be Then Came You by Lisa Kleypas. I really like that book. That one got me.
By Lisa. So Then Came You is your favorite one.
Somebody mistook me for her. Every now and then people get me confused with her, and they'll be like, oh, I love your wildflowers. And I was like, you can always confuse me. If you're going to confuse me with anyone, I'll take Lisa, because not only is she super incredibly smart and witty, she was also in the Miss America pageant. So I get that too. And I was like, nobody's ever thought I was going to be in the Miss America pageant. So I'm like, I'll take the beauty and the brains, and
those books.
She's everything. And the books, yes.
Yeah, mine's again that magic. That's and her contemporary Blue-Eyed Devil. But yeah, those are my. So yeah, that's interesting that we have the same favorite all-time romance author. Although I think there's everybody.
Well, I have a number of all-time favorite romance authors, but if you put me on the spot for a specific book, or a book where that I've reread many times and just always gets me, that's the one at least that comes to mind first.
That's awesome. All right, so we're out of time. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. This is
especially after the long day you've had. So this was fabulous.
Yes.
Come back soon. And I have this list of upcoming shows that I need to announce.
Okay.
And I'm so tempted to just say you do it, because you seem to do this so much better than I do. All right. So coming up on Author's Voice, we have July 18th is the next Lit with Love, and that's Julianne Walker, who writes the most fabulous romantic suspense, and that will be at 6 p.m. with me.
I recommend her.
She's lovely, and also a lot of fun. July 25th, our new show, Stranger Than Fiction, meets with Laura Tempest Zakroff to discuss her book, The Witch's Cauldron, which is such a great title. July 27th, Ladybird and Friends returns with another great children's book. Check out our, we don't know which one it is yet. All right. And our website, which is authorsvoice.net, will have that information. And on August 1st, Stranger Than Fiction returns again to speak to Chicago author Donna Urbatis about the exciting true story of Polish refugees, Soviet war camps, and a mother's love. Come back to authorsvoice.net for updates and details, and we're booking a whole lot of new shows. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Julia,
Yes.
and we'll see you on July 18th.